For our live example, I would please ask that you open the MACD notebook located in your course content folder so that you can follow along with our example. So with our last example and all of our financial indicators, we're going to be importing data from Y Finance. So we are going to start with our import Y Finance module as YF. Down here, following through, we're going to create our function, and then a little bit beneath that, we're going to then call our Y Finance module and then append our function output that we are looking to create. So with this, the MACD, I'll try to, as we go through each section, become a little bit faster maybe with the explanation so that you can learn from the last examples and not listen to me drag on rehashing the same things that we've been taught in each of these sections. But I'll go through, try to walk through the MACD calculation, and then I'll try to walk through and show you what's happening again so that we have a good understanding and go over anything new that came from the last section and that we might be using here as opposed to that last section. So again, so let's start with our function. So we're calling the Y Finance, and then we're creating our MACD function. So we're going to create a def called calc MACD, and we're going to input to this function when we call it the close list. So this will be a closed list that we're going to get here later when we execute the code. To calculate the MACD, we're going to look for two exponential moving averages, a faster moving average, which is calculated over a 12 period interval, a slower moving average over a 26 period interval, and then we're going to subtract the two to obtain our MACD. The signal from the MACD is obtained by grabbing a 9 period average of the MACD to the mean of that 9 period average as our moving signal line as that comparator, so that we can look for those crossover events. And then here in our final return call from the function, we are going to be passing back out of the function the MACD itself, so this value created here, and the signal, which is that slower moving average, or the 9 period moving average that will allow you to plot the MACD against and look for those crossover points. So now jumping further down, when we go to execute the code, we will have a familiar call here, one that's should be very familiar to you at this point, where we are assigning our variable AAPL with the Y Finance call, passing it the ticker AAPL for Apple, and using the dot history method within that API, within the Y Finance API, and telling it we would like 2 days worth of data at 1 minute intervals. Again, this should feel very familiar to you. This is a call we've used multiple times now, but this will return our data frame for the previous 2 days worth of data at 1 minute intervals. Down here, this is where we're going to differ a little bit from the last call. This should look familiar in that we are going to call the MACD function, and we are going to pass it the close column of our AAPL data frame that we created here. But the difference from this and the last is that we're actually going to assign 2 new columns and create 2 new columns for this data frame. So where we've already created the structure with AAPL, we are now going to call 2 new data frames, or 2 new columns for that data frame, the MACD and the signal, and we are going to get the return values from our MACD function. So again, real quick, just to rehash what's happening, and then we're going to run it and walk through it together. When this code executes, it's going to skip past the function because it's not being called, but we're going to import our module. It will ignore our function until called. It will first execute the AAPL assignment as the data frame from Y Finance module to get the last 2 days worth of data at 1 minute intervals. From there, we are going to come down to start assigning our new columns to our data frame by calling our function, the calc MACD, and passing it the AAPL.close, so our data frame.close. And once we do that, you're going to come back up here and you're going to take the close list as the input. So we passed it the close. It's getting the close list as the input, which is the only thing it needs to run. It is going to use the last 12 rolling 12 through that list to calculate that exp1 value. To calculate exp2, the slower moving average, we're going to look at the last 26 and calculate a rolling 26. And then of course to get the MACD subtraction and then signal, we're going to take that 9 moving average to maintain that signal line. Now here again, we're going to return two values. We're returning the MACD and we're returning the signal. So these are going to correspond in order to the data frame columns that we would like to create. So with the Apple MACD and AAPL signal columns, we want to assign first the MACD and second the signal to the pertaining columns. So let's go ahead and run this. Alright, upon run, we're going to now run our second field here with AAPL, and you will see that we have our standard data frame that contains our timestamps with our open, high, low, close, volume, dividend, and stock split data. And from there, you will see our two new additions to the data frame in our MACD and our signal, which were calculated in our function and then assigned all in this one step to these two new columns. Again, as with our last section, if you want to see what this looks like before and after, you can put print functions throughout here to do checks, or take things out of the code and pause it. And for this, if we want to remove this line call or comment it out, and then come in here and run it again, see what the data frame looks like without that call, you can see we've got our standard data frame. And then we can go ahead and add it back in, rerun it, and see that those values for the MACD and the signal are added. Again, I would recommend, as I do in all these sections, to play with this, play with the time spans. If you want to go to your favorite stock evaluation tool and look at what the MACD does when you change those values and see how they correlate to the data you're pulling, it's a good idea as well. But I'd recommend changing the values. As always, change the period of the data you pull, change the intervals. MACD is an indicator often used over daily intervals. So if you wanted to grab a year's worth of data at day intervals instead of doing this on an intraday evaluation period, that's a good thing to do as well. So plenty of practice, plenty of things you can mess with in here. Again, just try not to save it when you do this in case you want to come back to it. If it's not the end of the world, you can re-download the course content again from the course on Udemy itself. But just remember that it's pretty easy to play with this stuff and see what you get as the output. Lastly, let me go ahead and clear the output. As we have done in some of the other sections, if you'd like to write this to a CSV so that you can test the full output and see what each of those values are instead of this subset of the data that comes when you run this AAPL, you can write that data frame to a CSV. Keep in mind, again, if this is open, if you have any of these test.csvs open from other areas, you're going to have to close those if you want to rewrite over them, or rename this test to test 1, 2, 3 AAPL, whatever you need that to be, and it will drop it into this course content folder as soon as you hit the execute. Alright, so with that, if you again want to practice, feel free, and then we'll go ahead and jump into our last value of the stochastics.